When I was a teenager, I loved listening to older people tell stories. There was something inside those stories I wanted to learn, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. And now, decades later, I've become that guy, the one telling stories, the old guy in the room. And I'll be honest with you, it's a strange feeling. Recently, my students asked me what it was like to be a teenager in the 1980s during the Cold War. For them, the Berlin Wall is history class. For me, it was the background of my youth. You see, I grew up in Yugoslavia, a communist country, but not exactly like Poland, Czechoslovakia, or East Germany. We were actually the enemy of the Soviet Union. We had cracks in the Yugoslav system, windows to the west, and we knew how to live in those spaces between. Life was a paradox. On one hand, there was economical crisis and political tension from time to time. On the other, there were concerts, jeans, Western magazines, and movies that somehow slipped through. Compared to kids behind the Iron Curtain, we in Yugoslavia had more access and, frankly, also more personal freedom. And that meant music too. When I was 15, music was everything. I was and still am very much into heavy metal music, and the way I got it feels almost unreal now. There was a Polish woman who sold cassettes on the black market. She would usually come to my hometown's marketplace and be there with her van and driver. When I asked for a certain band and album, she'd whisper, 2 weeks, I'll bring them in 2 weeks. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, she'd show up with treasures, Iron Maiden, Scorpions, Guns N' Roses, Metallica. It wasn't just buying music, it was smuggling freedom into my headphones. Those tapes carried the sound of rebellion, energy, and a world bigger than the one outside my window. For me, and for a whole generation, music wasn't entertainment, it was oxygen. And as I told my students the story, I watched their faces. Some laughed, some leaned in, some just looked amazed. For them, Spotify has always existed. Music has always been instant, unlimited, and disposable. But for me, those cassettes were the opposite of disposable. They were sacred. Each album carried weight because it had been waited for, hunted down, passed hand to hand. I didn't listen to single songs, but whole albums. I treated them as a complete work of art. Nowadays, albums are dead. It's all about mass consumption of a bunch of different single songs. And in that moment, I realized I had become the old guy with the stories. The guy they listen to not because he's young and cool, but because he's lived through something. And maybe, just maybe, there's wisdom in that. Getting older isn't about losing youth, it's about gaining perspective. At 18, I wanted to absorb wisdom from others. At 40-something, I'm handing it down. I've lived long enough to know what it was like to grow up in Yugoslavia during the Cold War, to buy Megadeth cassettes on the black market, to feel freedom through music before I ever felt it in politics. And now, when students lean in to hear about that, I realize stories matter. They keep the past alive. They connect generations. Stories confirm our humanity. So yes, I'm older now, but I like to think I'm also wiser. And if wisdom is just surviving long enough to tell your story, then I'm fine with being that guy.